I want to thank you for being here today remotely as we talk about your new book. Um, I wanted to start by saying that we scheduled to have our little chat today several weeks ago before Zoom was cool.
That's
Uh,
right.
we planned to speak, and now with all of the cancellations and closures, everyone is using Zoom and Skype and FaceTime for their meetings. But interestingly,
New Jersey.
you're in New Jersey.
I am in New Jersey.
And I'm in Iowa. And of course, we're recording this interview for Flute Specialists, which is located in Michigan. So it's a technological world we live in, and I'm so glad that you could meet with me today and talk about your new book.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's definitely an honor to be here virtually with you.
Great. And as we get started, I wanted to ask you about all these virtual meetings we have right now. How are you doing with the many closures and cancellations of our world right now?
Thanks for asking. I'm doing okay so far. My school where I teach is canceled for at least the next couple of weeks. So I've been doing online lessons for my elementary school students. But in terms of the flute world, it's been so cool to see so many different people doing like virtual concerts and festivals and events. And luckily, we have all this amazing technology that has been driving our industry pretty strongly for a long time. And so it's really cool to see it like in the center stage. As a technology fan myself, I am loving that.
And what a great transition to your book, speaking of using technology.
Yes, so my newest book, my first book, The Glissando Flute, is finally out, and I'm just so happy that it's done and so that I can share it with all of you guys. And if you haven't seen the head joint itself, maybe I should start with that because some people might not have seen one before. So this is the glissando head joint, which was invented by Robert Dick. And what it is basically two tubes that slide in and out of each other. And it does a whole bunch of different things, which I will explain in a little bit. But here's just the most basic sound. So in the book, I really get into all the different things that this head joint can do, which is way more than just a glissando.
Wonderful. That's great. Thanks for demonstrating and having that available for us to see. I think you're right. Many people have not seen or played the glissando head joint before. You agree?
Oh, definitely. I think that they are becoming more common, and I hope that they continue to become more common in the flute world, especially since there's more resources out for it now. But when I see people at flute festivals, that's a good chance to play one. Like at NFA, people like yourself will bring them to the conventions and exhibit halls, and that is an awesome chance to at least get to play one. And I recommend every flutist should at least try it once so you can see what it is like.
So speaking of that, tell us about your background with the glissando head joint. How did you get started?
Well, I was studying with Robert Dick. This was about 2012 to 2014. And when I was finishing my lessons with him, I finally was able to get my own head joint. So I started playing on it in 2014. And pretty quickly, it became my primary head joint that I was using just every time that I was getting my flute out, especially when I'm improvising or composing, because every time I would play it, I would find all these amazing new uses for the head joint that I had never thought about before. And to me, to play without this head joint, it's limiting. I feel limited, and I find myself wanting to have that tool on a traditional head joint, but now I can't go back. So ever since then, that was about 6 years ago now. The first few years of playing was just a lot of exploring and improvising with it, and just realizing that there wasn't a lot of information out there about how to use it. And since I became obsessed pretty quickly, I just started keeping little notes about things that I was doing and trying to find a way of writing down the notation of how this would look on paper to use the head joint. And there was already some music out there, so I had some ideas of how I could use it myself. But in terms of trying to explain to others what I was doing, I was getting so many questions about why would I want to play this? What can it do? What does it sound like? And eventually that grew into the book that you see here today.
Great. So let's talk about the book then. How long did it take you to put this book together?
Right. So like I said, I wasn't originally planning on writing the book, but I was collecting ideas and presenting little parts of it over the past several years. And I really started writing on the book last summer. Like, okay, I guess I'm going to actually make this a book. So since last summer until about January, those months, I was working on the book primarily. So it was several months focused on the book.
Great. So why do you think that people really need to go out and buy this book? And really, they need to buy a Glissando head joint, right? I mean, if you have a Glissando head joint, buy the book. But why should someone buy the head joint, and then why should someone get your book?
Thank you for this question. This is exactly what I would like to do, is just show you some of the techniques that I have found and that I write about in the book. So before I played just like the basic bend of the glissando, and that's pretty useful in lots of circumstances. You have the ability to have a greater low range. For example, if I finger low B and pull the head joint out all the way, now I can get down to a low A. So you got some brand new notes on your flute. It does some really interesting things if you keep it all the way pulled out. I don't know what to call these scales. Right now in my book, I call them new scales. If I play a C major scale and keep it out in extended position, you get some really interesting things that I feel have huge potential to be explored. In terms of the multiphonic world, now you can transpose multiphonics, play brand new multiphonics that were otherwise impossible. You can play quarter tones really, really easily. And if anyone out there plays any contemporary music and you've encountered quarter tones, you know that the fingerings for these things are kind of ridiculous and impossible to remember.
Absolutely.
So instead of remembering all those fingerings, I can do like a quarter tone descending scale by fingering maybe an A, whatever note, and just pulling out incrementally. By the way, if anyone out there has played Ian Clark's piece, Zoom Tube, there is a really difficult quarter tone scale there towards the end of the piece. And with this head joint, it makes it a lot easier. And there's lots of other passages like that in the repertoire. But the most powerful thing, I think, is the ability to play in a style called portamento, which is something that singers and violinists and guitarists and pretty much every other musician on the planet has been doing for centuries. And portamento is just adding very, very small bends to the beginnings or ends of notes, and it makes it sound very expressive or vocal-like. So for example, if I play I'm going to make up a melody without any bends in it. No portamento. If I add some very slight bends, it changes the entire expressive mode of that melody. So to sound more expressive is, I think, the hugest potential. And this idea of portamento we haven't talked about as flutists because we haven't been able to play bends very easily until now. So this is something that defined so many musicians' styles, like Louis Armstrong, like Frank Sinatra, like Jimi Hendrix, and their whammy bars of the guitar and different techniques in jazz are based on this idea of bending notes. So to be able to unlock that as a flute player is, to me, enormous.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. You're right. They write a lot of bends, and as flutists, we work hard on that technique. And you've kind of hit home to my world. So, say somebody who is a classically trained musician, this looks a little scary. We don't do a lot of improving, and that might be a little frightening to us. So sell somebody like me on why should I get a glissando head joint?
Well, of course, for the contemporary music that is already written, it makes many things a lot easier. For a composer, this is something that's new where you can really set yourself apart and write for an instrument that not many people have written for yet, and to create a whole new sound. So that's pretty powerful. There are many through composed pieces. I have at least one myself that someone like yourself could sit and learn like any traditional piece. And in fact, there's several here in my book, like my solo Tilt, which I released the video for last year. The full music notation for that is in here, as well as lots and lots of exercises. And I think everyone should spend a little time learning improvisation. It just helps everything, and there's nothing really to be afraid of there. But I hope to see, what I expect to see in the future is more and more repertoire written for the glissando flute, now that there are more resources for what it should look like, how to finger different notes, and what different sounds to expect from different head joint positions. So it's all written down, and that also helps me a lot to see it visually.
Right, and as a composer yourself, you wrote this for other composers to try to get them to write more for the glissando flute as well. Do you want to tell us about any of your other compositions or arrangements?
Well, sure. I have, as I mentioned, Tilt. That's for just flute. It's one of my originals. Also in this book, I have a few arrangements, such as a violin piece by Monty called Sardis, which is a traditional old folk piece. And I have some Jimi Hendrix arrangement, and he uses the whammy bar so much that it just naturally translates to the glissando head joint. And those are all in here, so you can take a slice at it yourself.
So it's not just for rock musicians, it's not just for jazz improvers. You have a little bit of something for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. And it encompasses all the different genres. I can't imagine trying to fit it into just one of those and say, oh, this is just for jazz people or this is just for classical musicians. It's for everybody, and I think its full potential hasn't really been explored yet. And so I'm excited to see how many different musicians use this head joint in the future.
So personally, I think you're amazing. And I've already told you this, but I think you're amazing. I think you have a great career. You've done so many great things with the glissando head joint, something that not everybody knows about, and you're really making your spot in a big crowded flute professional field. So I'm wondering, what tips do you have for flutists out there, young and old, of all ages, maybe I'll say, who are still trying to find their niche in this big noisy flute world? What advice do you have?
Well, thanks, Heather, for that. That's really sweet. That's a great question. I think that there's room for all of us to have our own voice in the music world. Personally, I went to music school. I have the traditional classical training, so I understand what that world is like. And I had some really great teachers, but I was personally feeling a little burned out myself after music, the music school for the first 4 years. So what I started to do was just to focus on the things that really spoke to me, that really brought me joy. I started listening to music that wasn't just flute music or not just classical music. And I think a lot of times people think that's taboo or a waste of time. But there's so many great musicians out there who aren't classical flutists. And just to feel that sense of like fun when you're making music is really important. So whatever that means to you, whether that's listening to Lady Gaga, whether that's listening to rock music, whether that's listening to hip hop music, whatever your special interests are, whatever really draws you to music and makes you want to just have fun or dance or party, like do more of that and infuse it into your flute playing. We all come from different backgrounds and interests. And I think what makes us have such a different, unique voice is combining the things that are special to us. And there's room for everybody. So just follow your joy, do what makes you happy, and trust yourself. Trust that that is the path to go, because I really do think that it is. You should feel happy when you're making music.
I love that. I say all the time, playing the flute is fun.
That's why they call it playing. It's supposed to be fun. So make it fun for yourself. It should be.
That's perfect. So normally I'd ask about upcoming events or anything like that. Of course, there have been a lot of cancellations because of this COVID-19 world that we're living in right now. And that's a situation that's evolving every day. So who knows, by the time we send this interview out, who knows what will have changed. But do you have any words of comfort for flutists out there with a lot of cancellations right now?
This is a time for music. This is what music is for, is to get us through these kinds of times. And on one hand, it feels super isolating to not physically be able to go to concerts or to give a concert. And I know that's really scary for a lot of people, especially those that depend on gigs for their income. So, use your music. This is a great time to focus on yourself, to focus on your art. This is a great opportunity. You can finally do that project that you've always been wanting to do but didn't quite have time for. Maybe that's improvisation. Maybe that's watercolor painting. Maybe that is learning the glissando head joint. So I think there's some silver linings within this. And luckily we have this amazing gift of technology and social media. It's so cool to see lots of flutists and other musicians giving virtual concerts and live streaming different events. So I think that there are places to go where we can still have our community, even though it's not in person.
And I can speak to you in New Jersey from me all the way over in Iowa. And hopefully people around the country will see this and hear your words. And thank you for those words of comfort. Do you personally have any shows coming up right now or anything we should know about?
Well, I'm hoping to do the Robert Dick's Contemporary Masterclass this summer. That's in June. So I do hope that we'll be able to go on. At the moment, I'm just doing some videos here in my studio and gonna have to just see how everything plays out for now.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for meeting with me today and talking about your book. Show us the book one more time.
Yes, here it is, the Glissando Flute, Handbook for Composers and Performers.
By the wonderful Melissa Keeling. And show us that glissando head joint one more time.
Here you go, the glissando head joint.
Lovely. Both available through Flute Specialists.